Okay, we're recording. I'm starting.
Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Um, it's very funny. We are recording in separate locations in the same house tonight because we're having technical errors with our mics, and so it's very funny to see you in my office, and I think your view is this lady butt behind
What's a
me.
butt?
Yeah.
That's cool. Is it like, did someone, like, I was gonna ask if someone made that. Like, of course someone made that, but who made that? Can you
I
tell?
don't know. I found them in a antique shop for because this is a audio medium and you guys cannot see what we're talking about. We are talking about these big, gigantic, like figure sketch kind of paintings that I have behind my bed because I am a classy broad. But yeah, so episode 11, we're recording episode 11 together,
Episode
but
12.
oh my god, we just discussed that.
Oh, that's funny.
It's the distance that's making it hard.
Yeah, that's got to be
I
it.
was just thinking about this like right before I signed on to the meeting, but like I was like, that song, it's like so far away. And I was like, it totally works for us because it's like, doesn't anybody record in one place anymore?
We will again one day. Like I was kind of looking forward to it because it's been so long. I think it's been what, 6 weeks, 5 weeks since we've recorded in the same room.
Yeah, it's been really hard. I just got back from the other side of the island yesterday, so or the day before yesterday, I can't even remember anymore, but just recently. So it's been challenging, but we're keeping it going. I guess yeah, episode 12 today, we're talking about wah wah pop punk. Is
Don't sound
clearly
so happy about it.
my opinion on the matter, but do you want to give the titular lyrics for the day?
Yeah, so it's I Want to Chew My Bubblegum with You, and it's a song called This Might Be Satire by the band Propagandhi. It's off like the first album I heard from them, which is How to Clean Everything. But yeah, they're really a political band, and the song is just really cute. It's very short, it's super poppy. This is like one of the songs that kind of defined the bubblegum punk era for me, which is we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Going to talk a lot about it later, but I guess let's start with the land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we are on native land, and we would like all of you guys to acknowledge that we're on native land, the Kingdom of Hawaii.
Yeah, and
Um,
you can consider looking into the history of the land that you're on, if it is Indigenous land or who the original owner of that land is. And if you are very fortunate enough to live in a place where you like are the people of the land, like it'd be nice to hear like what your experiences with like access to your land is like.
totally. So I guess checking in. How are you doing this week? How's this week going for you?
I mean, like this week is what it is, but like today was kind of fucked up. Like,
Oh shit.
yeah, no, it's just nothing's been like really wrong. It just has been like kind of depressed. I've been kind of depressed. And so then I saw this meme that was like, let's normalize bad days. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of where I'm at, I guess. But the mister was like, oh, I love that you exist. And, he's just telling me nice things. And I was like, thank you. That means everything. And I like was hugging him. And then inside my soul was like, and it means nothing. And it was like, okay, hello. Where did you
Existential
come from?
crises, yeah.
Yeah.
Floating around your head. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a bummer, dude. Well, I
it's
hope that
fine.
this is improving your day.
Yeah, I didn't get a really restful night's sleep, and so like and I'm waiting to hear about two interviews that I had, and so like that time is really like nerve-wracking a little bit.
Sure.
And then like Penelope, my peahen, so I have always looked at her like she is not ours. We didn't go out and get her. We didn't like formally adopt her or anything. We were just like her caretakers or whatever. And yesterday she just disappeared. And so she kind of has been gone for the past 2 days. And I'm like, I didn't even get a goodbye or
Oh my
nothing. And I've been,
gosh.
yeah. And I'm like so sad about it. And like, because I'm like, I've been feeding you for like 15 months. And like, I didn't even get a goodbye. There's no I will remember you moment. So it's fine.
It's, I don't know, the circle of life or something.
Yeah.
Um,
What's going on with you though?
uh, Nothing. Everything's pretty good. I am working. That's great, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm in like a really interesting place, so like a deadline right now because I personally feel like I'm stretched way too thin on it, and that like it's just really stressful, and it just feels like more stress keeps piling on top of it. It's all around this one grant, so it's like fuck, I just want it to be over with already. Like it's not only the grant itself, but it's like for those of you who aren't familiar with like grants and how they work, like generally if it's a federal grant, it'll go through a website called grants.gov, which is like
Mm,
a submission portal, but
yeah.
uh, their website is fucking up a bunch, and so
Oh
they keep
no.
moving the deadlines and like making like all of these special kind of uh like circumstances for you to submit if like their website is fucked up and stuff, and it's just like holy shit, like nothing about this whole process has been easy, and I am so excited for it to be over in 2 days. It's just getting to that 2 days, and I'm actually like really excited moving forward because I just did a contract renegotiation with one of my clients, which frees up time to work with another one of my clients who I am really stoked to work with because that one is music based. So
Oh, nice. That's
um,
very exciting.
yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. It's just a matter of like getting through this last like couple day stretch that is hard.
That sucks. I hope that everything goes okay though, and like it's smooth sailing and this grant gets submitted like pretty
Yeah.
easily.
It
That's
either
really the
will or
main
it
thing.
won't. I mean, that's life, right? But
Yeah.
do you have any current events you want to talk about this week?
Oh, I don't know. So there's a couple of things that come to mind. The one is the cake on the Mona Lisa thing, and then the other one is so also so random. Jeffree Starr owns a yak farm, and
Okay,
I
all
don't even
right.
know how I know this. Okay, yeah, follow me. Okay, so Jeffree Star owns like a yak farm, and he um shout out to shit you should care about, by the way, because this is where I read about this, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. So he started like a social media presence, and then he did trademarks for everything from like raising yaks to like trademarking like the butcher process and marketing labels and all this kind of stuff. So the entire like pipeline for producing yak meat. And like I guess when he posted a picture of like his yak meat, and Jeffree Star was all proud and like people just blew up at him like, how can you called these yaks your pets and now you're like butchering them and like doesn't this go against like your anti um cruelty-free vegan like makeup line and like Jeffree Star just kind of doubled down on that like instead of being like oh I see your point like Jeffree Star just was like that was about changing industry standards and this is completely different. I never said that I was vegan just because I make vegan makeup and like yak meat is very good for you. And I'm interested to see how all this plays out. is the
Yeah,
bottom line.
yeah. I mean, veganism is, or like, yeah, it's such a strict set of parameters for a lot of people, you know what I mean? And like it comes with like not only like ethos but like an ID, like an identity, so it's like I feel like it's really weird when people feel like they have to be like keyboard warriors about things like who gives a fuck if Jeffree Star is making cruelty like free makeup and then also like eating yaks, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't really seem like an issue worth giving a shit to me on like a personal level, because that doesn't affect my life at all. But like it's amazing like how when it's somebody, like I would never like take the time out of my day, I guess, to like go and like tell Jeffree Star how I feel about his life. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um
totally.
it's weird when people do that. You know what I mean? Like they're so committed to like this like identity that they built themselves that they feel like they need to go like personally like scold Jeffree Star for his life
Yeah.
choices. That's
Yeah,
really
I don't
fucking
know
weird.
how that's gonna I don't know how that's gonna work out, but I am interested not in following it, but just in reading like about the aftermath of it. Um, oh, and then there is one more thing, but it's not like a news thing, just like I was on Twitter and I saw that someone posted like there is a water crisis on Oahu, like just stay away, like do not travel to Hawaii. And like people were like, you wrote that in all caps. Like what is and then like other so anyways, the point of it was that there was this discussion about how people were like, isn't most of the economy driven by tourism, or aren't most of the jobs by tourism? But then a couple people were like, the water crisis isn't real. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I did just kind of step in to like just share some of the resources that we've shared about Red Hill, just because
Hmm.
like if someone who doesn't even live in Hawaii is talking about it on Twitter and then people are like sharing this and commenting on it, like I do just want to gently educate people that like the Red Hill water crisis is totally a real thing.
Yeah, I think that has a lot more stake than like steak, no pun intended,
Is it a
than
yak steak?
Jeffree, yeah, and then Jeffree Star's yak farm, you know what I mean? Like, um, essentially, like, that's like, I feel like that is something that, we do want to encourage people listening to this show to understand that, like, visiting Hawaii is a privilege and not a right. Um, just like visiting anybody's indigenous homeland is a privilege and not a right, and so I think that it is so much easier for people who would like to view that as their right to just like create a totally false narrative to justify like why they should be able to do whatever the fuck they want to do. And so like even if it's as nuts as saying like that's not real, like you know what I mean, but that's the same thing people do with everything else, like people who are like the earth is flat, or like we didn't go to the moon, or like whatever, like what is the reason for believing that fucking batshit narrative? Like I don't know, but like whatever, like just to be contrarian to like suit this idea that they have or whatever, I guess. But like that's the same thing with Hawaii, and a lot of people are like really guilty of doing that because like yeah guys, like it's part of the United States, kind of. Like
Yeah.
um but like it's not a playground for tourists, and like there's very proud indigenous people here, and like when they ask you to do something you should respect their wishes is all I'm saying. um
Yeah. What about you?
yeah.
Any newsy stuff jump out at you this week?
um More of the same, like looking at world news, it's kind of like I read a pretty good article about how fucking, Poland is um opening their borders willingly to Ukraine, but they are not opening their borders to refugees from like the Middle East or Africa or, South Asia. and it's pretty fucked up.
It's so crazy how all this stuff like keeps coming back. Like I've been really amazed at how when we talk about things, they're still relevant and like they keep coming back up. So
Yeah.
like this is something we talked about in episode, I want to say episode 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's 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 just the like age-old tale of like white privilege, right? Like, I mean, Poland's willing to take Ukrainians because, well, Eastern Europe, right? So it's like they're really they look the same. They have similar like origins and bloodlines and stuff. Like it's really easy for them to not feel afraid of Ukrainians, but like, for whatever reason, the Middle East and Africa and South Asia are just fucking horrifying to, and it's weird the way that like we justify those things as well, where we say like we don't want those refugees in our country because like they're criminals or something, and it's like what? Like that's criminal isn't a race. Like that's yeah. It's really shitty, but yeah, mostly like I've been kind of not checking out the news lately just because I have a lot of shit going on with work for one, but also, it's just kind of like it's just like more of the same, you know. And I'd like to put my focus elsewhere, like pop punk. Segue.
Yay! Okay. So Diz and I often have, well, it's not really a debate or anything, like, because sometimes I just listen or whatever. I don't know. But we have different, I guess we have different opinions on where pop punk fits in the spectrum of all the different genres of punk, right? So, um,
Or if it fits at all is really my question, and we'll get into
yeah.
that later. But
Yeah. So like in the mid to late 90s, there started to become this emergence of like not necessarily a genre, like it crossed all genres. Like bubblegum punk started to get popular, which is punk rock songs that are just more about like love or like relationships and moving away from the political. Um, I guess the Reagan years really did a number on a lot of people, and they were like, I just want to step away from all this political whatever bullshit or whatever. I don't know. And so in the 90s, there was like 4 bands that made it out of the underground and into like the mainstream, like solidly became hit makers on the radio. And they were Bad Religion, The Offspring, Green Day, and Blink 182. And like 2 of those bands are definitely foundational to what would become pop punk. So there's like, probably punk bands that never have listened to anything, or like those are like their foundational influences, like Green Day and Blink 182. And so like it's just growing up in that time, it was just kind of like, oh, like it felt wrong to not support Blink 182 and Green Day because they were like the same before and after. They didn't really change their style too much to like make money or like conform. It just like it was made poppy. And so it was like, oh yeah, you go. Like I remember when Blink 182 had the video for Damn It, the first time it was going to be played on TRL, and I was like, oh my gosh, so excited. Like because it was a punk band. Like it was like a band that like I saw play at like a record store. I wasn't actually at the record store show because it was on a weeknight and I wasn't allowed to go out on the weeknights. But my other friends went and they went and saw them and they were like, they suck live, which is like what a lot of punk bands do too. They like suck live. Um, but it was really
mm-hmm.
hard. It was really hard to not get excited. Watch like at them doing this huge momentous thing. Like they were played on TRL. Um, and then with the Offspring, they too, like it was like, okay, like cool, like do it, get in there, and they have just evolved so much like in their time in the musical spotlight like since the 90s. And then Bad Religion is the most like true to punk y to me, like not bubblegum at all. And like, when they I don't know, I never really I like two like Bad Religion songs. I don't know. Um but they broke through and it was like, oh, cool, it's you guys. You were the ones that made it. I would have preferred other bands to make it, but they made it. And I don't know, just they kind of all shaped the landscape of what would grow into pop punk.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of like stop you there and ask you like, do you not consider like the origins of pop punk to be like the Ramones? Because like that's definitely like that was, pop as shit. And like all through the 80s, there was also like a huge amount of like these new wave kind of like pop punk bands that came like way before like the early 90s, or like, I'm sorry, mid to late 90s, like
Yeah.
versions of pop punk, you know what I mean? And like, I think like the difference between all of them were the fact that like the in the mid to late 90s the world was in the right place, to like to embrace like pop punk culture. Like kids had lived, their parents had lived through the 60s. There was like the actual like American hardcore phase in like the 80s of punk rock, and then like we saw like the metal scene like emerge in the 90s, like prog rock, like Tool and stuff like that. So like I feel like particularly too, like, young white kids were like primed for like pop punk at that particular like junction in history. So like I would argue to say that like pop punk, has pretty much been around as long as punk rock has been around, like because it was sellable, like I know right now Sex, or what the fuck is it called, Pistol, right? That Hulu
Oh
show
yeah,
about the
the
Sex
Hulu show.
Pistols.
Hmm.
Yeah, like they they're blowing that show up, like there's promotion for that show fucking everywhere right now, and they are, I mean, the Sex Pistols were pop culture for sure. So like arguably like pop punk, and arguably like the first and like biggest pop punk band. The Ramones were pretty big, but I think the Sex Pistols were more controversial, so they probably just had more exposure that way.
Yeah, I agree that they were too risky. So yeah, like I definitely see the Ramones as pop punk. And I guess they are credited with like the emergence of it, but like I don't really know if they had a big mainstream radio presence. And I
I
know
mean,
the
they had a
Buzzcocks
movie
too.
though.
Yeah, but
Like they literally like rock and roll high school and shit, like, they're like
yeah.
starred in like movies about the Ramones, so I think like they were pretty fucking big. And like, yeah, I would say like the Buzzcocks, who like I love the Buzzcocks, but yeah, definitely I would consider the Buzzcocks like a pop punk band.
So
Um,
then what's the okay, so what is the difference then between is it like what is the difference between the two eras? And then what grew into like what we now consider as like sugary, sticky, sweet pop punk. Like
well, I think like what happened was, like I said, like that was like the mid to late 90s was a generation primed to like embrace that kind of music, because like it wasn't really strange anymore, you know what I mean? Like it was
mm,
it was pretty like lukewarm by that point as like a subculture. And like I think also, like, I don't know if you ever saw the uh Woodstock documentary about like the 99 Woodstock. I think it was 99.
oh, that was a
um
travesty.
yeah, totally. So like they talk a lot about this particular subject, not pop punk particularly, but like how the 90s and like the late 90s particularly like were this era of like angsty young white men and women, but like mostly men, like, you know, ruling the country. So like when they tried to bring hippie culture back to like recreate Woodstock, like the culture had just shifted too much. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it was never going to be peace and love and fucking acid for 3 days,
Mhm.
like at that juncture in time. Then that's not where the nation was. That's not where the like pop culture was. And so I think that's kind of like the same thing that happened with the 90s was like it was never going to be that like bubblegum or like I mean it's definitely bubblegum. What's the word I'm looking for? Like that like almost like benevolent um genre punk rock ever again like the Ramones were, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because culturally as a nation or like as a world even by that point like we had shifted
Mhm.
towards like much angrier, much more aggressive, much more like if we're gonna talk about like Blink 182 and shit, like much more like snot nosed brat kind of bullshit, you know. And like college kids also like I don't know if college culture changed at some point between like wanting to be like a do-gooder and then like wanting to be a partier because that shift seemed to happen in the 80s when they started releasing movies like Porky's and shit, right? Like
Mhm.
so I wonder if it was like this like interest amongst college kids to embrace like pop pop punk culture that like took it to such a kind of like spoiled rich kid place, I almost want to
Mhm.
say. Um
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it's true or not. I think it would be really interesting to look into that. And like, what was the music of frat boys, at the time and
I mean,
stuff.
you know, when I think of like pop punk bands, like I definitely, especially like that SoCal pop punk era of like Blink 182 and stuff, like or like let's put it under like the guise of like Warp Tour, okay? Like Warp
Mm,
Tour bands is like a really great way to describe that era of like pop punk because like what was that but a fucking pop punk festival, right? Um and I feel like so for Warp Tour, like bands like Pennywise and stuff were headlining. And I know that they definitely came out of like a different origin. I mean, I guess not that different from Green Day, but like,
yeah, they came out of the Hermosa Beach tradition. But yeah, they
yeah,
so that's why I'm like the Warp Tour changed too. Like I would never go to like the Warp Tour, you know, now or even in the, mid 2000s. Like it just became so different.
well, like I think that's like where things started getting twisted though. Where like, so when at like the point where Pennywise was like headlining, like that was definitely some fucking frat boy music. Like they literally have a song called Bro Hymn, which is like the broiest bro song in all brodom, you know?
It's
So
such
like
a it's such a tribute. Like it's oh
it's a tribute to your fucking frat brothers. I mean, that's definitely I understand what it was to them on an emotional level because they're like specifically talking about like their friends who had passed away, but like the way that it was being absorbed by like college kids was definitely like my bros, like my fucking bros, which like, you know, my fucking frat brothers, my fucking like my boys, you know, like that very interesting culture of like uh douchebaggery. Anyway, the point is that like at some point it went from that though into like and like this like very I don't want to say like toxic masculine, but like definitely more like masculine, like tough guy punk ideal into what we started to see in like the early 2000s of punk rock where like Blink 182 went from like having like some like college party drinking songs into like we started seeing a lot more love songs and a
Mm.
lot more like really sad love songs. Like even like AFI jumped really hard
Oh my God,
into
they went
that.
so emo.
Yeah, and like where did the lines like the parallels between like pop punk and emo at that day? Like I don't even know the difference. Honestly, I couldn't tell you the difference between a lot of those bands. But like at some point, like Warp Tour went from being like frat bro kind of like music into being like sensitive frat bro. kind of music. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for I feel like the music got fucking worse. You know, like we started, it was like, at one point it was like Pennywise and like, you know, Propagandhi and like um more bands like that. And then all of a sudden Green Day, even I would even say Green Day had a better day. Um and then all of a sudden we got bands flying off the shelves like Good Charlotte and like
Yeah.
Simple Plan, you know what I mean? And like then this is where like I really struggle with pop punk as like the uh genre that it is today, and basically like the genre that it has been since around like 2004-ish, in calling it punk rock at all, is because like it essentially like became more of an attitude and less of like a musical style altogether. Like when you think about like songs by bands like fucking Good Charlotte or like Avril Lavigne especially is the one that's really mind-blowing to me, because I don't hear punk rock in it. Like I understand that it's guitar driven, but like other than that, I'm really failing to see like how that actually translates as punk rock or even pop punk to anyone. It sounds like fucking Britney Spears to me.
Yeah. I mean, so Skater Boy, I think, is like the closest thing. And then because she was associated like with Simple Plan, who, so I kind of missed that whole era when it was happening,
Mm-hmm.
because I was on drugs. Yeah. And like so I was listening to electronic music and dance music and stuff, and like I would see these videos and I'm like, it felt appropriated is what happened. Like,
Yeah,
and
sure.
in some ways, like it's like, okay, this is the evolution of it. This is what is making money at it. Um, and you know, the music machine is going to keep doing what it does. So if it wants to make money off of exploiting punk and turning it into this thing,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's fine. But like the popularization of punk rock, once a song with like a there was a song for a Doritos commercial, and I was like, punk is dead. Like I can't even tell you what the commercial or what the song was, but it was just like punk is dead. Everybody knows this band now. Like it's just dead. Um, and that happened in like 99 or 2000. And yeah, and then I do feel like punk got exploited like for commercialization and money
I mean,
and
I was just gonna say I think that had happened a few times like throughout
its
its
history.
existence. Yeah,
Yeah.
but like I think the difference notably was that like when people like with the Sex Pistols, let's use the Sex Pistols as an example, like the Sex Pistols were still being very controversial. Like uh even in their fame and their popularity, which is like what was making them famous and popular, was they were like very controversial, you know, like I know that like, you know, God Save the Queen got banned in the UK, which is like, sure, that's pretty cool, whatever, guys. But like also like, you know, when you hear songs like Animal and like these like lesser known songs by the Sex Pistols, like they were actually writing like status quo challenging music, you know?
Mhm.
And then with the Ramones, like the Ramones were also doing that to more of an extent of like, you know, sniffing glue and like that kind of stuff, you know, and then even like into the mid 90s, like the Offspring had like their entire album like Americana was very had like a lot of controversial lyrics on it. I remember that album specifically, um, with like songs like The Kids Aren't All Right, you know.
Mhm.
But then the next like wave of it is uh fucking Newfound Glory, which is like this really nasally, really whiny, really like poor me. Like it was like it completely lost its fucking teeth.
Yeah.
Um and I
So
just
I
feel, oh sorry.
oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say like I just feel like between like that shift that it had taken between like this like semi-political, like set to like poppier melodies, like kind of music into like shit like Newfound Glory was just the adoption of the attitude, which is like we covered this when we talked about punk rock movies, because like
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to just like adopt punk rock fashion and like punk and like a bad attitude and like see somebody as a punk rocker, you know what I mean? And like, but like really you're just probably a teenager, you know what I mean? And like that's what these people were writing music for. They were pandering to like the demographic of like the American teenager, or
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, not specifically American, I guess, but like, yeah, a lot of American teenager. um so like I that's where what I mean when I say like I struggle to even call that punk rock anymore, like even to say that it's like rooted in like pop or like punk rock. It could literally be anything. It's really amorphous in my brain.
Yeah. And in many ways, I'm on the same page as you, but at the same time, like it's kind of like people like I think Henry Rollins at some point was like, all these love songs are not punk. Anybody that writes a love song is not punk. Like all these bands that don't sing about political music are not punk. And so
Mm-hmm.
like, they're talking about the pop punk bands of like the 70s and 80s and then even the 90s and stuff too. Like, and it's like, wait a minute, but that's where the roots are. And so I don't know. I part of me definitely feels like you it can't be excluded from the spectrum. I mean, there's a part where like if the artist makes the jump and it is more poppy than punky, then no, it is pop. It's not pop punk anymore. Um, and it's funny, like one thing um I was thinking about is so in the 90s there was two big record labels and they were Epitaph and Fat Records, and Fat Mike
Mm-hmm.
from NoFX owns Fat Records, and he was saying even too like that there's an aesthetic to the musicians that he wants to work with, and so he would never sign Newfound Glory even though they're great people, just because he also doesn't consider them punk. um and I never heard pop punk until like a friend made me a CD, I think in maybe it was '05 or '06, of like the popular pop punk bands, like just because it wasn't something that really interested me. Like um again, I think that goes back to like what it means to like what does it mean to sell out? Like what is the difference between selling out and making it? And if you're just doing this thing to like make money, or like this sound was put together to like exploit a culture, like that was something I wanted like no part of. But it's catchy as fuck. Like some of it is really like, oh yeah, I'll get down to like Fall Out Boys, Sugar We're Going Down now, like
um yeah, so like my question about that though is like what makes this punk? Like what makes this punk rock as opposed to any other kind of rock and roll specifically? Like is it the fact that they're only using three chords? Like what are the defining factors that like makes this punk rock other than their attitude though? Or like their style of dress because they have like tattoos and shit. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I have a hard time because musically, like as somebody who like plays music, and like I feel like I have a pretty good head to decipher like styles of music, you know what I mean? um I just don't hear it. Like I hear how Newfound Glory sounds like Green Day, and I guess I can hear how Green Day sounds like the Ramones, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? But like I don't like like I said, like the further into like the late 90s early 2000s like you move, like it like I can hear fucking Chuck Berry in the Ramones, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's like your origins like don't really define like what the music evolves into later. And like if we're going to say like a spectrum, then like yeah, let's put pop punk on a spectrum of rock and roll, I suppose, but I don't know that I would put it specifically on like a punk rock spectrum. Like Just like I don't know that I would put bubblegum pop on like the same spectrum of like pop that fucking somebody like you know, Prince was on, because like Prince was this incredible fucking musician and Britney Spears is auto-tuned. You know what I mean? Like, how do you even put them, stack them up with each other?
Yeah. I hear you, but I think that's part of the beauty of like having a spectrum, right? Is that it does give like these wide like arcs and like I think like so I definitely hear you and I acknowledge your point about like is it just punk in fashion? And I think that at some point that is what pop punk became. And I think yeah, the cutoff is gonna be somewhere around that early 2000s point, like when it did kind of jump to being more poppy.
Mm-hmm.
Um and but I like some of it is in the content like we were talking about Good Charlotte earlier and Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous is like it is a social like critique in some ways, right? And so
Yeah.
you so like I feel like okay, that's kind of like the
I would
line
call
though of
that
where
social
pop punk
hypocrisy
ends.
at best. I would call that hypocrisy at best, because I'm pretty sure those motherfuckers were like on MTV Cribs and stuff at that same time, you know, like they blew up huge and like were on like the
Mm,
cover of like teen magazines and like all of those things. And that's what I mean, like thematically, sure. I understand how you could call that like punk rock. Like I'm making air quotes for those of you who can't see me. But like um I like, yeah, sure, thematically, just like the way that if I fucking thematically go and put on black lipstick and an onk necklace and all of these things, like I could be a goth kid, but it doesn't fucking make me a goth every goddamn day, right? Like it's just this thing that I'm doing in the moment. And like I
mhm,
feel like that's what these bands were doing. And I feel like that's validated by the like urgent, or like not urgency, but like the like overwhelming willingness that all of those bands took once emo became the new thing, and like it wasn't cool to be like this SoCal kind of like pop punk caricature anymore. Like all of a sudden we have these fucking dudes wearing like glittery eyeshadow and being like real like sad and like writing about like suicide and stuff, you know what I mean? Like, so
yeah,
like
just following the next trend.
exactly. So like that's definitely not punk, you know?
No.
Um and so I just feel like, and then their music from there, like, is that still pop punk? Like after they took that shift into being like this like wah wah fucking sad band, like are they now an emo band, and are they no longer an emo pop punk band, or does the spectrum continue to grow to be emo pop punk, or like, you know what I mean, like where what are the defining lines there, because it's all the same trash, like it's just trash with minor chords now. Like
Oh, I just have love how like honest you are and like I had a thought and it is gone and it was like because you made some really good points and I was like yeah like that is the line. I mean like we're not here to police what people think about.
yeah, sure, you're welcome to think whatever you want, but we are here to ask the question, because we're asking each other the question. That's the whole point of the discussion.
Yeah. And yeah, so like I don't know. I feel like emo got really far away from like what punk rock was. But like I remember like talking to people and they would be like, "Well, of course that's the next logical progression in the music of punk rock is to get like super confessional and like into my feelings." And I'm like, "Okay, um but this isn't like it didn't feel like punk anymore. It felt like another line. Like a demarcation, you know?"
Yeah,
And oh, go
I
ahead.
mean, I was just gonna say, like, I think like calling that music like pop punk would be like calling The Cure pop punk. But like The Cure isn't classified as a pop punk band, you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
so like, but my point is with pop music like this, like there really are no defining lines, because this isn't really music stylistically speaking. Like it's not really coming from like a place of like musicianship or like culture. It's just kind of coming from like pop culture, which is just whatever is cool at the time. So like that's what I mean, like the music changes like to suit the mood of the song with emo, but like their musicianship, like their level of musicianship is still terrible. You know what I mean? Like it's because it's a don't bore us, get to the chorus formula.
Hmm.
It's a pop song. And
Yeah.
so
And yeah, so then like it comes back to like, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for the money? It'd be the same thing as like wanting to be TikTok famous, and like make it like I'm gonna say something, and I don't know if I'm gonna regret it, but like
yes, say it.
is music made for TikTok really like whatever it's supposed to be representing? So like, or like, because TikTok artists are like defined solely as being like TikTok artists, like that
Sure.
is what they are, and it is like an encapsulated thing. Like, would I a friend, when I was making a dissertation playlist, I solicited recommendations, and one of my friends recommended a TikTok artist to me named Ashniko. Her song uh is, I'll find it later. But she's someone that I'm like, oh, are you gonna blow up? Because like when you look at like the money that's put into these TikTok musicians, like it's like they have full-on music videos. They have a production team behind them. But
Mm-hmm.
like I don't think we would ever hear Ashniko on the radio. Like, and um and I know that's where you're coming from with pop punk. Like pop punk is this self-contained thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I definitely do see it that way at some point. Like there is like a cutoff where it's gotten so far away from the genre. And I think that's what, we're trying to like work through is like what is like that line. And like it definitely, I feel like now I'm just circling like,
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard subject not to circle because, like, I think I'm not saying that there's like a definitive answer to this question, but what I am saying is that it's an undeniable X factor in like the conversation of pop punk that it is, um,
it's made for money.
it's made for money. It is fucking bubblegum trash. You know what I mean? And like,
Mhm.
that's not to negate anybody that likes to listen to it or like, but like, it was like formulaically made specifically to like pander to a certain demographic or like to appeal to like a certain like radio friendly kind of like ethos or like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
it's which is why I'm saying like, the Sex Pistols at the time where they were like punk in pop culture still had teeth. Like there was still a lot of teeth in punk rock. This shit never had teeth. It was never made that way. You know what I mean? Like somebody, it's the fucking it's like
The
the
abominable snowman, and all his teeth are ripped out in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
I was gonna say more like it's like one of those weird fucking purse dogs that people carry around, you know what I mean? Like once upon a time that motherfucker was a wolf and now it's a tiny monster that has a hard time breathing. And like that that's what it seems like, pop punk is. It's just this ridiculous like it's just this stupid fashion accessory, it seems like. And like now, that's actually a great place to talk about it because it's making a resurgence again. Um, when the first time that big resurgence was happening, um, I was a teenager, or it's I guess it's second wave, I should say, was
Mm.
like coming up. I was a teenager, and that's like when it really exploded, and that was Green Day, and that was Blink-182, and Newfound Glory and Good Charlotte and all of these fucking bands. And like, I was 12, 13 at the time. And like, I think those, like culturally, you're surrounded by that music. So I'm very familiar with it. You know what I mean? I'm sure that I liked some of it. Um, I definitely remember liking Blink-182 because they swore a lot and I thought it was funny. But like now in this new resurgence of like pop punk, like what the fuck is this, bro? Like if we're struggling to call that era of pop punk rock, like this, I will not do. I will not do it. Like you fuck right off with that. This is nothing but fashion. It's nothing but like you can be from any subculture and write a song that's empowering for women. You can be a fucking bubblegum pop star and write a song that's empowering for women. We watched the Spice Girls do it in the 90s. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like so like whatever like thematic like choices that they're making, like that is like qualifying them as pop punk or like anything to do with punk rock right now. Fuck that. No, fuck off with that, dude. I don't even want to hear about like this new phase of like Avril Lavigne coming back. Like, there's one thing I want to say about Avril Lavigne, and that's fuck you, Avril Lavigne. And I'm saying that because when she tried to make her last comeback, I think the world forgot that it was like a super racist fucking like Asian
Oh,
caricature.
the Harajuku
Dude,
kitty video thing.
fuck
Yeah.
off. Are you kidding me? That was just like, oh, girl, this shit feels problematic as hell. You know what I mean? And like she
Mm-hmm.
petered out after that, and then like now she's back because pop punk is making this big like return. But like, no, I'm not ready to forgive that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never liked her in the first place, but like I don't think that we like with all of the things that we're talking about now and like cultural appropriation and stuff, I don't think that we should just let that
Slide.
go. Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago.
No, it
Like,
wasn't. I feel like we already moved back to the Big Island when that whole thing happened, but that could be wrong. Like from
yeah.
Oahu.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I was definitely like with my partner at that point, so I think like it was sometime within like the last 9 years, you know, which is like still way too recent for that to be okay. Um,
Yeah.
and then like the stuff that's happening now though, like I know I had to look up what new pop punk is
Oh, I have no
today.
idea what it is. I have no,
Yeah.
I can't even tell you like at all.
Well, it's a lot of the
I
old bands for sure who like are coming back to like pull out that like one trick pony kind of act that they had. And then it's also like this idea of people like Willow Smith is coming up a lot in like the conversation of pop punk, and like Olivia Rodrigo, who like I've never actually heard of before today. Um,
She's definitely pop. She
she's
is
definitely
firmly
pop.
confessional pop. Yeah, confessional pop. So, okay, there's a couple of things. So for okay, I work a lot with data sets, and Spotify has publicly available data sets, and like whoever classifies their music is like wrong so much. Like the things that they classify as punk and metal are not like punk and metal. And so like if you're ever trying to like find stuff, like I can't just let like their punk algorithm play stuff because it's this weird like because Avril Lavigne, yeah, she is considered punk in still, even though like her music is not. It's like weirdly hip hop and like I don't know.
Mm.
So she was dating this dude or whatever, and so they, if I play the new punk rock playlist that is auto-generated for me by Spotify, I can't even make it through like 20 seconds of any one song on it. Like it is so not what I consider punk. And if this is the direction that punk is going, it's only the direction that mainstream punk is going. So, because
Hmm.
there is still like punk music being made and released like today
Yeah.
in 2022. Like it still is there. So, like, there's this bifurcation at some point. And I think that point is the commodification of pop punk. And like, maybe that's why maybe that's why it feels like it's so separate because there still is other punk and new emerging punk bands that are like political or like you know like critical, social critical, or like, and they sing love songs and they're confessional, but like it just more is in line with like the spirit of like the original spirit of punk rock, and not this weird bifurcation where it became something just record artists figured out how to, or record executives figured out how to monetize.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like when you have something that like punk rock that like existed, well, I mean, okay, so like punk rock kind of came up in its like own right as like this like genre of music because it was anti by nature, right? It was like, we're going to be raw, we're going to be fast, we're going to be all these things that like these modern day bands are not, and we're going to make this music ourselves, like this DIY culture and all of these things, right? And so like when I think about punk rock, that's what I think about specifically. And so like pop punk music is and always has been the exact like antithesis of that culture. Like um and that's not to, like even the Ramones, like in making movies and shit like that, like that's still like the antithesis of that, at least that ethos,
Mm-hmm.
surrounding that culture. So like when I like challenge pop punk to say like where do you even fit in here, like that's exactly what I mean, like because it seems like by its very nature it was only invented to be a watered down like fashion statement of like rebellion, like it's like a caricature of rebellion.
Oh,
Like
I like that.
the thing that they're doing now is the same thing that they were doing in 2004, where it's like, to define somebody as punk rock, like all they needed was like a fucking plaid skirt or like heavy eyeliner, or like, you know what I mean? Like it was really just much more of a costume, because like
Mm-hmm.
I said, the music didn't matter. Like literally anybody could have been playing that music. There's no reason why you have to even call that pop punk specifically. That you could call that pop rock and it would still make as much sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um so yeah, I think like my guns are very much like stuck on one side of this argument, where it's like I don't think there's much debate to be had in terms of this subject matter, because I don't even put them in the same universe. Like you like to call back to the metaphor I used earlier, like I wouldn't put Prince and Britney Spears on the same spectrum of musicians, because Prince was a musician and Britney Spears was a caricature of a musician,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I feel like that's kind of a good place to call it,
Yeah.
because you summed up some things pretty good. Um,
I mean, if you have anything like, to kind of like sway that back in the opposite direction, like I'm definitely willing to hear it. I just,
well,
I'm
I
s- I'm
think
so I'm
it
so committed to this.
think that's cool. I'm not trying to like change your mind. I mean, like I definitely see the validity, but I of saying that like pop, what the fuck? Pop punk at a certain point did become its own thing. It is its own thing. It is now. I feel like it is now fully separated, but I do feel like it is like there is a spectrum. And like if someone like feels like they've come up in punk rock and all they've ever known is pop punk, then I feel like, okay, well then it's, like let me educate you on like some other styles of punk that are foundational to like how we got to here, like
Mhm.
and like let's talk about that. Like what are the things that you like about this, and then as it's so hard now because there are no clear boundaries
Mhm.
anymore, and
Totally.
that makes things really messy. And so I think if we're looking at pop as a genre, definitely Prince and Britney Spears are both in that pop genre.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Totally.
but I do feel like they are separate. Like one is definitely an artist and a musician, and the other one is an artist in the sense that they are, commodified to present what other people have written and choreographed and, developed for them. Um, and like, yeah, I don't know. And then I would also say that one is firmly pop and the other one is rock, like, which is also like it's so weird. How
Yeah,
even like you can't tell the difference between like now there's pop country, like, but it's not, it's like, is it just country artists doing pop? Is it pop artists
yeah.
doing country?
I
Like,
mean,
what is this?
it seems like the same thing. It seems like it's just pop music, but they wear cowboy hats. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? So it's like that's exactly how I feel about like pop punk, where it's like, okay, you have spiky hair or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but like, the thing that what I want to reiterate about like my Prince and like Britney Spears metaphor is like, I guess I'm looking at that from more of like a big picture, kind of like a much wider, like broader spectrum of like what classifies like a musician and like what doesn't. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
Because
I don't
like,
even think Britney would say she's a musician.
yeah, but I think the world would. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
when you look at the people who get inducted into like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and shit, like some of those people, I would very much argue like probably not, bro. You know what I mean? Like um
yeah.
actually some of them are like I don't even understand how it's rock and roll. But like, I think when you look at pop culture and the way that like the world um idolizes it and like accepts it as like an ultimate truth about itself essentially, um it seems fucking depressing if that's what
Yeah.
you call art. You know what I mean? But like also just really like like you were saying, if you're somebody who grew up in pop punk and that was your idea of punk rock, because I know a lot of people like that, like who like when they hear that I listen to punk, they'll be like, "Oh, so you like Paramore?" You know what I mean? And they say shit like that, or like even like if you take it further back, like when I first met my partner, he's like, "I hate punk
Mm.
rock," and like fucking, you know, fucking NoFX, blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, dude, I've been in love with punk rock my entire life and never listened to fucking NoFX. You know what I mean? Like, um, so I understand how like that a lot of people have that idea that that is punk rock, but like I would just encourage you to like look further back into the roots of like punk rock and like not just like what was getting radio play throughout its history. Like,
Mhm.
the internet is such a vast and available space now to like do this kind of research, and if you do like pop punk and you do like some semblance of like what you're hearing in terms of like this easily marketable rebellion, if that speaks to you, then like maybe look into some rebellious lyrics that aren't so easily marketable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I know before it was like, oh, I like this band. I want to look at their influences. And I think we're so far down the pop punk rabbit hole. I don't even know if those bands that are up like popular today would have influences like that are outside of the genre so much. Like I remember looking at a band that I liked. Well, my friend was like, "Oh, they like the Dayglow Abortions," and so she ordered like a tape, and then we listened to the Dayglow Abortions. They are not my kind of band, but they're someone's kind of band.
mm-hmm.
Um, but it was just cool. Like that's how you discovered new music. Like really try to get out of the algorithmic space and what is recommended to you. I feel like, dear listener, get out of like the algorithmic space and try looking at like who people's influences are, or looking at like the bands that we talk about, or like the bands that our shows are titled after. There's a band Diz wants to keep using, but they're not on Spotify. So can you talk about The Pissed for a little bit? Because we can never
Yeah,
put one of their songs as our as our title.
I mean, I've talked about the Pissed a few times. I feel like in this podcast, just because like lyrically, they have some good lyrics, and like that's a band that I grew up with as a teenager that like really spoke to like what I loved about punk rock and punk rock culture. You know, there was like a lot of like unity, like promoting like we're gonna like fight this together, like kind of camaraderie through their music. And they're definitely like street punk kind of music. I think they released 2 albums and then they became Behind Enemy Lines, which is like a much more hardcore version of that band. But yeah, like I think like it was the exact antithesis of like what pop punk is for people when they like hear all of this music about like my girlfriend and this and that, like I mean the Piss literally has a song called Bubblegum Bullshit that is very like sarcastically talking about this exact subject of just saying like play your bubblegum bullshit blah blah, like um I think that probably really aids in shaping like the way that I feel about it, because that is the punk rock culture that I grew up with. But like they're not wrong, like I don't know, it's when money gets involved, when money becomes your identity, I guess, too, like it's hard to accept that for me. But anyway, if you guys want to check out the Piss, they're hard to find on Spotify, but you can definitely find them on avenues like YouTube and stuff. Ideas
I
are
think they're on
bulletproof.
Last FM as well.
Oh, okay, that's cool, good to know. Yeah, they're definitely findable. And I guess, yeah, if I'm going to recommend one of their albums, Ideas Are Bulletproof is a good album.
Oh, is that your band recommendation then for the week?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, they're not a band that I would like pop on today and be stoked to like jam out to. Like maybe if I was with my friends, like my old friends, But like I definitely like my like technicality musically to be a little bit more advanced these days. That's definitely like if you're into like that American hardcore kind of like sound of like punk rock, that very like forceful like thrashing guitar, and like what's the word I'm looking for, like very like straightforward like lyrics, then I would recommend the Piss to you. I'd recommend them anyway. Yeah, fuck it, go check them out. They're great. But yeah, if I'm gonna recommend like a band that I really like, that I've been listening to lately, I'm gonna recommend Hellshock's album. Hellshock. Their album is Only the Dead Know the End of War, and it was released in 2003. And yeah, Hellshock is a super great kind of like hardcore, crusty, deathy band from Portland, Oregon, and they're fucking phenomenal. And if you're into that, I would check out that band. You got a band to recommend?
I do actually. I've been listening to a lot of the anti queens, the anti queens. Yeah. So it's an all female punk band. They've been around for a while. I've been listening to their self-titled album a lot, which that's actually what Run is on, is their self-titled album. I think I said last time it was on their most recent album. And their self-titled album came out in 2019. They're just really great. I love their perspective. I don't know. It's very refreshing to like hear them for me. And now I don't know. There's someone that I like go to look for like, yeah, um, like I'll look for them in my playlists and stuff.
Right on. You have any
Yeah.
organizations you want to shout out this week, or any causes, or?
I do. I have just been thinking a lot about Las Vegas. I don't know why. It's just been coming up a lot for me. And I want to shout out the Arts Factory, which they're an organization that helps organize First Friday all around Las Vegas and downtown Las Vegas. They are kind of, well, they're not kind of, they are world famous and they have plenty of art galleries and like a restaurant and a bar and like all kinds of cool stuff. And like they have murals and like sometimes they'll throw parties. I don't know. It's just a good place if you want to support the local art in Vegas. So that was the thing. I think they like founded because people were like Vegas has no culture, but Vegas has tons of culture. Um, and they promote a lot of like local artists, different kinds of artists. What about you?
It's not really an organization, but for anybody who has, been following our Instagram page, I do want to call attention to our good friend Chris in the band Therapy, at Therapy SD on Instagram if you guys are interested. Chris is facing a really hard time medically, and they are a wonderful person, and they do so much for the punk rock community and everybody who is surrounding them. They're always the first person to help out. Uh, they're facing a really hard time medically. You can find out more about it on our page. We're going to keep posting the GoFundMe. But if you're into supporting the punk rock community, which like you should be, support your fellow punks, support your fellow musicians, support your fellow human beings, please donate to help Chris through this tough time. And it means the world to us and means the world to them. And just thanks for even taking the time to listen to that. I know it's always weird to ask, for donations and stuff, but like this is a really, really great cause and a really, really wonderful human being.
All right. On that note, should we wrap it up for today?
Yeah, I think so. All right,
All
guys.
right.
Well, pop punk, what the fuck is it? We don't know.
Oh, yeah, we don't. That just came down to we don't know.
We don't know, but we'll see you next week. Okay, bye.